What is going on, and welcome to another episode of the Time Killers Podcast, a show about games, movies, and everything else we kill time with. My name's Neil Rivera, and I'm killing time with one of the 1%, the privileged few who can still afford to play video games in the year 2026. It's Matthew Field. What's going on, Matt?
What is going on? Happy to be here.
We are, surviving this sort of wave of just price increases and just negative sort of headlines that are sort of hitting the games industry as it relates to like the AI bubble. Seems like everyone's investing in RAM chips, and that's driving up costs. That's not fun. So we're going to have a big old discussion about just gaming in 2026 and just what it means, like to get into the hobby and what it means for the future. And then back half of the show, Matthew and I, we are also going to be talking about the Steam controller and Reanimal, catching up on some releases in 2026 now that we've kind of got a little bit of downtime before the fall releases. But before we get into that, guys, we want to remind you that you can listen to past episodes and find us on your social network of choice at timekillerspod.com. Don't forget to DM us your questions, your comments, your hot takes once you do follow us. And if you're listening to us here, whatever podcast service that you're listening to us on, give us a subscribe, leave us a review, give us 5 stars, let us know how much you love us. It means a lot as we continue to grow this podcast and find an audience. All right, let's jump into it. So there's been, like I said, a slew of headlines that have come out here since our last recording. We've got the Grand Theft Auto 6 pre-orders, pricing around that has released. Then we've also got the announcement that Xbox is raising prices yet again. It's the third time in the span of a year that Xbox is raising the prices on their hardware. Also earlier this week, the Valve announced and revealed the Steam Machine pricing for all of their models for their sort of like plug and play PC, living room PC. And then there have also been reports, leaks, rumors that Sony's bill of lading cost for the PlayStation 6 is currently estimated at $1,000. So factoring that in, plus, Sony selling it at a little bit of a margin or a little bit of a profit, we can expect or kind of guesstimate that PS6 is going to cost $1,000 or more. So yeah, all of that is sort of a cocktail to lead us to just this big, what I would call an affordability crisis in gaming. And it comes at a time where, there's kind of a general, more broader affordability crisis going on across the country where, not only are people struggling to afford $700 consoles, but they're also struggling to afford groceries. So I guess, the best way I guess we can tackle this is kind of going point by point here. Let's start with Grand Theft Auto 6, right? This is sort of the big release of 2026. This is sort of the game that's supposed to be the shot in the arm that the industry sort of needs or sort of looking for. Rockstar comes out, they announce pre-orders, and you've got an $80 standard edition of the game and $100 ultimate edition of the game. So this isn't the first game to come out and price itself at $80 for a standard edition. It's Mario Kart World also has that distinction. But the big story here is that the Ultimate Edition is locking actual in-game content behind the Ultimate Edition. So you have like some in-game locations where you're able to customize your car with exclusive customizations and mods, hair, nails, clothing, things like that, like actual locations in the game. So a lot of the conversation around Grand Theft Auto 6 specifically seems to be that the real game, quote unquote, costs $100, whereas you're spending $80 and getting the more stripped down version. Matthew, what did you make of the Grand Theft Auto 6 reveal? Were you shocked at all around the pricing? And what did you make of the sort of the Ultimate Edition price locking or locking some of that content?
I was not surprised by the pricing scheme here. In fact, I think if you go back to one of our episodes back at the beginning of the year when we talk about the preview in gaming, I believe my on the record prediction was that it would be $80 for the standard edition. So I'm that's exactly what I expected. I think that it makes sense. The $100 Ultimate Edition, as you mentioned, is kind of interesting. It's not unusual for an Ultimate Edition of a game to be $20 or sometimes even $30 more than the standard edition. But I think, and it is still just cosmetics, at least as far as we can tell. The way that they have kind of framed this as particular in-game locations that are adjoined to those cosmetics is interesting, and it makes it seem like it's a big deal. Like, oh, these whole stores you're missing out on, when really the stores are just cosmetics.
Yeah.
I have mixed feelings about this. On the one hand, I mean, at least they didn't charge $100 for the game, which they could have done. I mean, it's all as I'm gonna say this again in a different way here as we continue this conversation, but it's all a calculation that the buyer's got to make about what it's worth to them. And I think there are going to be, because this game is going to be bought by so many people, not even just at launch, but just over the next decade or more.
Mm-hmm.
I think it really does make. I mean, you're going to get a huge variety of people who are how much they're willing to pay for it, and whether they care about this stuff at all. So I think I don't really have a problem with this, I guess, is what I would boil it down to. I think I'm never going to get too upset about locking cosmetics behind a higher edition of a game or DLC or something like that. Like, ultimately, it's just cosmetics. I think when you start to get into functional stuff is when it gets a little bit iffy in my book. So I mean, you could say that they're bending the norm here a little bit, considering this is all just for the single player, campaign.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think that does have merit. But I mean, like I said, I mean, they could have just charged $100 for the game, and that would be the entry price. But I think having $80 as the entry point is a good place for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think it comes down to, I equate it to the board game industry, right? Where like you do have, I think you're starting to see that sort of distribution of price points take place in the video game industry as well, where you have your high end board games that cost, three figures, hundreds of dollars. And then you do have the sort of smaller, more less, less expensive versions, of those games. And so, yeah, I think, GTA 6 is going to fall on the higher end of that tier. And it comes down to the size, the scope, and so, yeah, $80 I feel like is going to be not necessarily the standard for AAA games. I don't think it should be. I think you're going to see a lot of publishers start to experiment with that, and it'll be interesting to see how gamers, audiences, consumers push back against that, if they do at all. I think Grand Theft Auto is unique in that it can, quote unquote, get away with that. And then, yeah, as far as like the Ultimate Edition stuff goes, I think it was a little overblown because, they are like in-game locations. So it was, people made a bigger stink about it than I think needed to be, because the vibe that I got from their own copy on the website was that these were just sort of additional locations with exclusive, customizations, that you weren't losing, entire. Like, I think the only thing that, as far as I could make out, that you might be losing out on is the nail customization, which I could understand. Like, if that's, if you're someone who's accustomed to GTA Online's level of customization, that could be a little bit disappointing. But for the most part, like you said, it is customized, cosmetics, and nothing really that has a huge tangible impact on the game.
And that is the other, you mentioned GTA Online, and that is the unknown here, which they have not mentioned it at all, or what their plans are for it, how much it'll cost, or what the pricing for anything you do there is. Obviously, GTA Online has been, from a microtransaction perspective, probably like the greatest number of microtransactions in terms of like dollar value, probably of any game ever, like all time. Just based on the numbers that we know, how much this game has made over time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't think, I mean, ultimately at the end of the day, fast forward like a year or two, the $20 extra for the ultimate edition of the single player game is going to be a non-factor. I think people are honing in on it now because this is the news that we have.
Mm-hmm.
But just wait until we start hearing about all of the microtransactions and the DLC for cosmetics, Grand Theft Auto Online. I think it'll reframe it in a big way.
Yeah, that's where they're making their money on it long term anyway. So yeah, that stuff is already, and it's already like I would argue it's already gotten to a gross point with GTA 5's online. So I imagine they'll come out the gate with some garbage with GTA 6 online. So yeah, I mean, all things considered, I wasn't too upset, right? Like, I think this was very much in line with what we were sort of expecting. I think, the prestige of the Grand Theft Auto franchise sort of, definitely lends itself for, Rockstar thinking that they can charge more here. But yeah, let's move on to, I think, the more troubling and problematic side of this, which is just hardware being just outrageously expensive and really showing no signs of slowing down in terms of price increases. It used to be, Matthew, once upon a time, when we were coming of age and playing games growing up, that hardware prices decreased during a console generation, and it seems to be the inverse is happening here. So just a quick recap: Xbox has announced that they are raising their prices on average about $150. So your Xbox Series X 1 terabyte is going to cost you $800, and then the lowest edition of the Xbox Series S is going to cost you $500. Fun fact, the Xbox Series S now costs as much as the Series X did at its launch. That's fun. And then, of course, the Steam machines are going to cost $1,000 for the cheapest, $1,049.99, and then the 2 terabyte edition with a controller is $1,400. So yeah, Matthew, I mean, not only are the games getting more expensive here, but for those who maybe haven't bought a PS5 or an Xbox Series console and were holding out for GTA 6, they're in for a rude awakening this November. What do you make of these price increases due to the ongoing RAM apocalypse?
It's really hard to divorce what is going on here with this hardware pricing from just the general memory and hardware cost increases across the technology sector as a whole, obviously driven by the AI boom. So I think it makes sense that it's affected by this. It's affecting everything. You saw Apple announce that they famously have not increased prices on their devices for many years now, but they are no longer able to, even with their kind of supply chain, they're not able to keep the prices the same. So they announced price raises of a couple $100 on existing products, and they're expecting the new iPhones this fall to follow suit. So yeah, I mean, there's no way around it. I think, obviously video games are joined at the hip with the technology sector, and unfortunately when stuff like that happens, video games are getting caught in they're catching a stray here, essentially.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, it sucks. It's a bad time for this to happen, for sure. Right before Grand Theft Auto, if we assume for a moment that it is going to be the shot in the arm, like you say, to the industry, which I don't know that we should be. I'm not sure that we should be framing it that way anyway. But if we assume that it is, and it's going to drive in all this spending across the platforms, this couldn't really be happening at a worse time.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't think it's going to be a Grand Theft Auto 6 is going to still be profitable. I promise you that. Everybody, if anybody is concerned about that, your fears are unfounded. I think Grand Theft Auto 6 is going to be fine. But it does mean that there's going to be some people who were planning on making some purchases this fall for it are not going to be able to do that, and they're going to have to wait, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think that, sort of, tease up a good segue into just a lot of thoughts that I've been having as, all of this news is breaking. And it's that, just like, what is the pathway really for a new gamer, right? Like, I can't imagine being a kid now and going up to my parents and being like, hey, mom, dad, like, I want this console, and they go and look and it's $800, like, I would get laughed out of the room. Did you have any thoughts, Matthew, on, like, what you would recommend to somebody who's trying to get into games? Like, how do you navigate this?
I think, as with any hobby, I think it's easiest to get started using the equipment that you already have. You know, and that would be, I mean, everybody's got a smartphone. A lot of people have tablets. Most people have some kind of computer. And I think, if you're looking to get into it, you've got to look to what you have, so that the hardware entry cost is not a barrier. I still think there's more room for ports from console games and PC games to come to mobile devices and
Mm-hmm.
tablets and stuff like that. I think it's gotten it's gotten better, I would say, over since maybe, I don't know, around COVID or maybe slightly before COVID. You started to see more ports for games coming over to phones and stuff like that. Especially, like, there was some large technical leaps that you'd get on, like, Pixels and iPhones around that time as well, that unlocked some of that.
Yeah.
But I think I think, developers who are making these games and publishers, they need to be making sure that as many people can play them as possible, and that includes people outside of the traditional video game storefronts. Um, I think, like, another point on the same topic is that, ironically, now Microsoft did try to address this, like, entry level problem with the Series S, and
Mm-hmm.
I think the fact that this Series S, you know, I mean, I think the Series S did actually get plenty of love from the target audience, from its target audience, in the years after its release.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
um, I mean, even now, like, that's just not, like, the specs in that are like extremely light. Like, you can't really even buy a computer that has specs that light, and this is what it costs. Like, it's just a tough sell.
It's hurting Xbox as a publisher too, because you're hearing stories of, like, Baldur's Gate was a famous example of one that was delayed on Xbox because they couldn't get it working on Series S. And you've heard stories over the years of different development teams and, different teams that didn't even release games on Xbox because they couldn't get it to work, or they didn't want to prioritize getting it working on Series S. So
Yeah,
yeah, it's
I
it's
mean, and
been
I sympathize with that too. Like, developers don't
yeah.
have unlimited resources. They're
Mhm.
time constrained, and nobody wants to spend money developing for something that isn't going to pay off for them. Um, it's a difficult situation for everybody. But I think
Yeah.
now more than ever, I think we have to look at, again, how do you get people on board? How do you break the barrier? How do you break the entry level cost, that it takes? Like, if somebody's not normally playing games and they see something that really catches their eye, or maybe it's a tie-in to a property they like from another, like a movie tie-in or something. Like, think about, like Blade, that's in development now. If somebody's a huge Blade fan and they don't play any other games, how are they gonna play that? Like, you got to think about these options. And cloud streaming is another one that is, got a lot of potential. I think it's, the bandwidth constraints there are kind of prohibitive at this point, for most
Yeah.
people. But I think, you know somebody's got to start paying more attention to these other avenues here, rather than requiring that people buy a piece of dedicated, expensive, increasingly expensive
Yeah.
equipment to be able to play these things.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I saw scrolling Reddit, and I saw that the discounting team they announced that they're releasing discounting on mobile, and that to me makes perfect sense. And I think the developers and the publishers who are thinking about making sure that their games are on as many platforms as it can run on, I think those are going to be the ones who find success, because like, another thought that I had was, you may see it may be viable to continue developing and supporting Nintendo Switch 1 and PS4s, last gen hardware, because, the install base there is so huge. And, I still would wager that you're seeing a lot of people opt in and buy the Nintendo Switch 1 for their younger children. So why not continue to develop for that platform? So I think it's going to hurt the heavyweights, your the hardware manufacturers, for sure. I don't, I think, we can kind of touch on a little bit the rumors that PlayStation 6 will, reportedly cost over $1,000. Like, I just don't see a market where a $1,100 ish PlayStation 6 sells and has the sort of cultural impact that the PS4 and PS5 have had. So it's I don't know. I really think that, like, the AAA model is the most sort of in danger here with these price increases.
I agree. I mean, you have the enthusiasts who are willing to spend more money on this stuff already. I think there will be some people who are able to kind of eat these increased costs and continue to enjoy them, but you are gonna lose some people. I mean, unquestionably, and that's just the reality. I mean, I think it's especially a dicey situation, like you mentioned, for the PlayStation 6, as Sony is doubling down on their console exclusivity of games. Like, they're not going to be making these games that their in-house studios are developing outside of the console anymore. So if somebody just nopes out of having a console next generation, they're also losing out on these software sales.
Yeah.
So
Xbox as well too. You've got all of this is happening, and you've got a new Gears of War game that's console exclusive that's launching this fall. You've got plans for more console exclusive games in the future, and Xbox, I would say, that's more concerning because they're a distant third in terms of hardware sales.
Well, those games, it's an Xbox console exclusive, but you can still play them on PC or cloud.
That's true.
So they're still leaving open more avenues for people to purchase from a software perspective, at least. But I mean, yeah, I'm sure they'll be affected by it as well. I just think that Sony is in a particular dire situation. If your barrier to entry for those new games is a $1,000 console that you've got to buy, that's a real issue for them, I think.
Yeah. I mean, there's no shortage of games, to play out there that, I no disrespect to Gears, I have the full intention to play Gears of War E-Day at some point. But, if you're telling me, like, oh, the only way I can play this is either build $1,000 PC or spend $800 on an Xbox, like, there's plenty of other third-person cover shooters that I can dabble with, if I don't have either of those platforms. So, yeah, it'll be interesting to see the impact on, software, especially as we see this pivot to away from Game Pass, rather, and doubling down on console exclusivity and, like, the marquee franchises, if that moves the needles for hardware. It's a weird time to be a gamer, man, because it kind of feels like we're regressing back to the old console war days, and I don't see a good business argument for it. It just seems, I don't know, it just seems like misguided.
It does. And I mean, it's not fun from a fan's perspective either, honestly. Like, I don't miss those console war years. And, like, if we're closing the book on the sort of open and multi-platform approach, like, these years have been, maybe they haven't produced, like, the greatest games, but from a ecosystem standpoint and being and freedom of choice and how you want to play these games, I think, the past 5 to 6 years have been great from that regard, at
Yeah.
least.
I mean,
So
Helldivers is a great example, right? Like, think of
yeah,
the community, and once they finally announced that that was coming to Xbox, to see that community respond to that, yeah, I mean, like, to see the walls come down was really, really cool. And it seems like, multiplayer games, there's still some wiggle room there. So I don't think that it's going to be go back entirely to the way things were. But yeah, I don't know, man. It's becoming increasingly unviable to own every single piece of hardware. So, I think it's, even as a hobbyist, like, there's potential that, you may miss out on some exclusives down the road. So it'll be interesting to see. I'm personally rooting for this AI bubble to pop, just so we can go back to having some reasonably priced video gaming hardware again.
think of the secondhand hardware infrastructure hardware that would be available if the AI was suddenly go away. There's a lot more. There would be a lot more capacity out there for fun things.
I mean, that's the thing too, is, I think of, alternatives like, things like the Next Playground that came up, they've also had to increase their prices as well as a result of, Ramageddon.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like, what are, especially, with Xbox, like, we haven't talked about the sort of like looming, like, shift in strategy restructure. We're recording this the day before Xbox is reportedly set to close a bunch of studios. But with that, like, like, it's kind of hard to sell $800 boxes when you're also closing down the studios that are supposed to make the software that's there. So it's like, it's got me thinking about, like, okay, who are the sort of middle tier players? Can someone come in and sort of occupy in this current market, sell something that costs in the $400 to $500 range, that plays games? And I guess the answer to my question is Nintendo, right? Like, they seem pretty well positioned with the Switch 2. We haven't mentioned them. They've raised prices, but they're still the I want to say the model with Mario Kart World or with a game is $600. So yeah, I mean, I like that's, I don't know, like, in a world where, yeah, you're looking at four figures for something to play video games, like, every dollar counts. So I think, Nintendo is another one to keep a lookout. And this generation, they've done a good job of proving that games like Resident Evil and Pragmata and like, these big sort of more graphically demanding games can run well on the Switch too. So that's another factor in all of this, another layer in all of this as well.
I think that's probably the most intriguing angle for me to keep an eye on. I think is like the Switch 2, even when it came out, it was like, not any more powerful than the Steam Deck.
Mm-hmm.
And like you mentioned earlier, with the Steam machine, Valve has not been able to get to work their pricing magic on their console equivalent either. So it does leave Nintendo as the only console maker with, I guess that you technically could consider the Series S in there, but I think the bang for your buck on the Switches are just better than that right
Mm-hmm.
now, especially when you factor in that it's the Switch 2 is getting most of the big multi-platform releases. And I mean, if it's like you said, if it's between buying a Switch 2 or buying a $1,000 Steam machine or a $800 Xbox Series X, and the only thing that it's costing you is like a little bit of graphical fidelity, I think that's going to be a trade off that a lot of people are willing to make. So yeah, I would think that presuming that we don't see more Switch price hikes as well, I think Nintendo is in a really good spot here as the low cost leader of the major players.
Yeah. Yeah, especially with, they've got the sort of built-in pop culture cachet as well, where they're sort of, prime tier, at least in the United States, to sort of be like a primary console for a lot of families. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see. And I mean, it'll be, really, I think the last thing, and I sort of touched on this before, was just like, what are these sort of big high end developers end up doing, right? Like, presumably this is going to shrink the audience of these, prestige, quadruple A, if you will, big budget AAA games. How, do they do, any developers who have these games that are actively in development, do they, scale down? Do they, what does that do to the quality of software really down the line? So yeah, I mean, I hope we don't have any more expensive failures. It seems like we've moved on past the point of the expensive, live service failures, but I would hate to see like a new era of like people really pushing graphical fidelity at a time where people aren't really able to afford it.
I think I agree. I think unfortunately that the people who are the quadruple A developers and the people who are publishing those developers see the graphical fidelity and the technical conversations as a main selling point of it. And I think that you will continue to see those developers push harder and harder to keep breaking new ground with graphics in their releases. And I think that is, we've already seen that it's unsustainable. I think it will continue to be pushed, and I think the top 1% of those developers that the list of developers who are making games like that and still getting funding to do that is going to get smaller and smaller. I mean, you're basically looking at a couple of the big Sony studios. You've got the Call of Duty teams, and maybe the people making the next Halo game or something like that. Like the number of studios making those really, really bleeding edge games is going to just decrease. And I think that's kind of why you're seeing, or why we're hearing these rumors of the Xbox studios shutting down. These are studios who were in that category, who Xbox clearly doesn't believe that their sales will be able to keep up with the increasing costs. And unfortunately, I think that's a big part of the equation. And so, I don't work in the industry. I don't know what the difference. I don't know how hard it would be to just kind of scale these things back and say, decrease the scope, cut the costs, and let them continue making games versus just shutting them down. It is awful. Obviously, it goes without saying, but unfortunately, I think that is kind of going to be. We're going to see more of that. Unfortunately, I think.
Yeah. It's we'll see what comes of the Xbox stuff in the coming days and weeks. Like I said, we will probably have a clearer picture of that once this episode goes live. So all that to say that as hardware prices increase and things sort of become a little bit more unaffordable for people to sort of break into and get into games, it isn't necessarily translating into better conditions and better treatment of the folks that are making games either. That being said, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we are going to talk about some hardware and software reviews. We're going to talk about the Steam controller and Reanimal. So stay right there, and we'll be right back. And we're back. Matthew, despite the fact that hardware costs are out of control and unsustainable for the industry, and it's really got me feeling existential, I still get to be excited about new hardware, even though it's in the form of a controller. I got my hands on a Steam controller, which is shipping with the new Steam machine, but Valve is also selling separately. I got part. I wasn't part of the initial wave of people who received them, but I did get mine after the wish list opened up. Seems like they're putting a pause on the wish list. Like it seems like now they're like the earliest you can get them now is in 2027. So I consider myself pretty fortunate to have one. And yeah, man, it's $100. It's developed by, obviously put out by Valve here. If you haven't seen one, the easy way to describe it is it's essentially the Steam Deck minus the screen. They've, captured you've got your two touch pads, you've got the four back buttons on the back, very much similar to how the Steam Deck is laid out. Same controller, same buttons, same triggers and thumbsticks. So it feels really good. I think it's got a really good, at $100, it sort of falls in that like middle ground between something like a DualSense and like the more premium controllers, like the Xbox Elite controller. And so I feel like it feels appropriate to what they're charging here. Yeah, let's get into the sort of like key features here, right? So this is obviously designed to be used with any PC. The mechanism, the sort of main mechanism that it interacts with your PC is going to be the controller puck, which is a proprietary device. It connects directly to your PC via USB-C, and then it's got a magnetic sort of clip that the controller clips to for charging, and then that sort of enables a like fast wireless connection, which enables low latency gameplay. Yeah, really the pitch here is, obviously more PC like control with the touch pads, giving you sort of a mouse like feel with your games, so that but not necessarily tethered to your mouse and keyboard. And I think that they achieve it. I really enjoy this controller. I think there are some caveats that I'll lay out here, but by and large, like I'm really, really pleased with it. And I think it's one of, if not the best controller that I currently own. The caveat really being that this thing is married to Steam. And so what that means is like you can't just like Bluetooth it, as far as my understanding is. So it's only going to work with your PC, and it's only going to work if Steam is installed and running on that PC. So there's been, I had a little bit of trouble initially setting up with games that weren't I didn't own through Steam. There's a couple of different methods that you can, obviously you can add non-Steam games to your Steam account, and that enables you to sort of get around it. But there's also like controller profiles. All of this to say that there is still that level of fiddliness with it, that if you do own a Steam Deck and you're familiar with having to go into desktop mode, like occasionally it doesn't work the way that it's intended. So it's an upgrade for me in terms of what I was using as far as my PC as a console. I was using a little Air mouse with a keyboard like attached to it, just for navigating my computer like from my recliner. But this I think is a good upgrade over that, but it's not without its caveats.
So I'm curious about a couple points here.
Yeah.
So yeah. All right. So the first thing here is, like you mentioned, you replaced like the keyboard and wireless mouse you were using here. When I'm using a keyboard and wireless mouse to a PC on a TV, the biggest problem, other than just like, getting a good surface to use the mouse on or whatever, is like the distance from the TV, like the wireless distance. So like it occasionally doesn't pick up inputs or anything like that. Does the puck that comes with this controller, like, does that solve the range issue and make it more comparable to what you would like, the kind of range you would get from either a DualSense or an Xbox controller?
In my experience, yeah, absolutely. I think the puck is like, it's a nifty little device, and it has the appearance that it doesn't do much, but I'm sure if you talk to somebody at Valve's hardware team, like they would tell you just how, important it is to the whole operation. But, like to kind of lay it out, like part of the sort of like, like onboarding process with the controller was, like you do updates, like, so I have updates for the controller, and then there are also separate updates that they push to the puck. So it definitely seems like it's filling that, a similar function as the dock to like what the Switch is, where it's sort of, enabling not only the range, but then the sort of responsiveness as well.
That's interesting that you would get like specific updates for the puck itself. I would not have expected that.
It's magical. Yeah. I mean, and the one thing I didn't mention too is that it's in another, I guess what I would call another upgrade over that Air Mouse combo is that it enables me to suspend and resume my PC similarly to like how I do my PS5 and my Xbox. That was one of my biggest pain points with trying to get my PC to act like a console was I couldn't use a controller to wake my PC. And this, presumably through the puck, through whatever technological magic it's got going on, allows me to do that. So that's another cool perk as well.
Second question I have about this, I guess, okay, I'll pivot my question here. How is the build quality on the controller itself? Like, you mentioned that this is kind of in between like what you would consider like a DualSense controller and the more expensive Xbox like Pro controller.
Mm-hmm.
How does it feel? Like does it feel like, has it got some weight to it? Like what is the build quality? How do you think this thing is going to hold up over time?
It is shockingly light. I wouldn't say, I can't say I've held like one of the Xbox Elite controllers, so I can't compare it to that. But, considering how much surface area this thing has with the touchpad and considering how heavy the Steam Deck is, I'm actually shocked at how lightweight this controller feels. I will say the size of it feels perfect. And I will admit, I was an Xbox Duke lover back in the day. And so this, I feel like has the form factor, but it doesn't have like the bulkiness of it. So it feels great. Like I would go as far as to say it's probably the most comfortable controller that I own, and I'm a little bummed that it's locked to just my PC because I could see a world where I'm using this with my tablet and other things just because of how comfortable it is. And the if there was a way, like, I'm not gonna say never because of Valve is sort of priding itself on keeping the platform open. Obviously they're big proponents of Linux, so I'll never say never with like the ability to use the controller with other things, but just out of the box it requires a lot of fiddling. So yeah, I mean, all that to say that like I'm impressed with the build quality. I wouldn't necessarily say, like, I would say like some of the like the buttons and the triggers, they don't feel as premium as something like a DualSense or like the Xbox Elite controller. If you're familiar with how the Steam Deck buttons feel and the thumbsticks as well for the Steam Deck, it's all essentially the same components. So it's, like I said, it feels like a good solid middle of the road in terms of build quality. I wouldn't necessarily say that it feels premium, so to speak, but given all of the stuff that it's got going on under the hood, I think it's a good, I think $100 is a good price point for it.
The ergonomics of this thing, you mentioned like the Duke controller, like the ergonomics thing is the biggest question for me. Like I'm very curious to actually like put my hands on one of these things because I also loved the Duke controller, like the larger size of it. Yet I have had so many issues with the DualSense controller. Like I cannot use the DualSense controller for prolonged gaming sessions without like physically hurting my hand. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't exactly know what my own issue is, but I would be curious to see how this feels in the hand. I don't have an issue with the Steam Deck, so the fact that you say that it feels kind of like that is promising for me. But
Yeah.
yeah,
I would
that's the
almost
thing.
say that it's an upgrade over how the Steam Deck feels in my hand, just because of the way that the back buttons are positioned. They sort of naturally fit to where my middle finger and my ring finger are on my left and right hands. So it feels like it sort of lends itself more naturally to using those. I usually map those to like sprint and dash and like those sort of like actions that you're spamming in games. So
Mhm.
it's really easy for me to just hit the back paddles. Yeah, I think it ergonomically, I like holding it more than I like holding the Steam Deck. So I think you'll really like it.
And my last question I have here: how is the battery life? Going back to the DualSense again, I think, when you've got the DualSense doing a lot with the haptics and the speaker and everything, it the battery life on it will drop real quick. Um, so and obviously this isn't doing quite as many crazy things as the DualSense is. How is the battery life that you've gotten from this thing so far?
It seems solid. I would definitely put it ahead of the DualSense, but I wouldn't put it on the level of something like a Pro controller. So I don't know what they're advertising for it, but it's definitely more than, I could say more than like five, like I'd say between 5 and 10 hours is what I'd put it at the very least. But I haven't like run it from full charge all the way to dry, so I might be underselling it. I've gotten into the habit of hooking it up and plugging it in at the end of the night, but definitely doesn't seem to be dropping as quickly as something say like a DualSense does. So no concerns here so far with the battery life.
Nice. Well, yeah. I mean, it
Yeah,
sounds like a winner.
yeah. The last thing I'll call out here is that because it uses Steam input, if you are a Steam Deck user, all of your presets are going to carry over. So it was really nice to
Ooh, nice.
yeah. I mean, like I've been playing through Crimson Desert, but I was streaming it on my Steam Deck. And so I kind of had already set up some button mapping configurations, and so when I booted it up on my PC with my Steam controller, all of that stuff carried over. So despite the fiddliness and it being sort of gated behind Steam, there are pluses to it, and it is like they're I think as long as they can continue to build out like Steam OS and continue to really make that shine as a console OS experience, I think the Steam controller experience will just get better from that, with that inherently.
Seems like they have every intention of expanding Steam OS, especially with the Steam Machine coming out as well. So I think that's a safe bet that they'll continue to tune this over time.
One game I am interested in playing on my new Steam controller is Reanimal, which came out earlier this year in February. This is the creators, the minds behind the Little Nightmares universe. They've spun off, created a new studio. So Tarsier Studios is the developer here. It's being published by THQ Nordic, as well as Amplifier Studios here co-publishing. And yeah, Matthew, you've played through it, you've beaten it. It's 1 to 2 player, it's narrative co-op, a horror adventure. So if you've played the Little Nightmares games, they're like these little dioramas that you navigate as these two small children, and they're throwing all sorts of just weird horror monsters. So Matthew, what was your experience with Reanimal like? Talk me through it.
Yeah, so I'm on my great summer journey to clear out some of my backlog here, and this is one that came out obviously early this year, and I had my eye on it since then. And when it came on sale, I guess a few weeks ago or a month ago at this point, I jumped on that. Um, so yeah, it's the DNA with Little Nightmares, which I would imagine most people are familiar with. It hit the zeitgeist. I it's very similar. I mean, it feels very similar. The mechanics of how you're moving around, the physics even of your characters move, like their movements, feels very similar to Little Nightmares. I think it's actually worth noting here about why wouldn't they just continue making a Little Nightmares game? Obviously, we have 3 Little Nightmares games at this point. Um,
Yeah.
from what I can tell, it seems like this happened when the ownership of Tarsier Studios changed. They were owned. They got caught up in the whole Embracer
Yes.
mess, and they eventually moved, or they got released from Embracer or sold or transferred or whatever. And their old publisher, Bandai Namco, for Little Nightmares, essentially decided to not have them continue developing the series and went with a different studio, Supermassive Games, and
Right.
they're the ones who worked on Little Nightmares 3. So I think there was an element of maybe them wanting to um, of them not really having a decision in the matter, but also maybe wanting to try something slightly different with the same type of feel. So all that is to say is that Little Nightmares is a very close touch point, but
Hmm.
this game does try to do some things a bit different.
So yeah, talk us through like like what are some of the differences, and like how do you think it stacks up compared to Little Nightmares?
I think Little Nightmares went more for like, I'm not going to say gory, but it tried to more be explicitly like gross. Like they went for more
Yeah.
of the gross out kind of horror. It wasn't very subtle. There wasn't a lot of like mystery in what you were doing. Like it was all just kind of like you're being put in some uncomfortable scenarios with a variety of like bad people, and you're trying to mechanically find your way around it. Um, in this, I would say it actually like there were several moments in Reanimal where I got vibes from like Inside, um,
Mm,
which is a big name to drop, I think. But I think it's undeniable that they have taken some cues from it, and just in terms of how they um, like their use of lighting and mood and pacing, really like it feels much more restrained to me than some of the Little Nightmares games. They know when to
gotcha.
step back and like kind of just let you like be in a moment, that's maybe something weird is going on, but there's not explicitly like a monster or something horrible happening. You just it lets you kind of soak in it, and you just kind of take in the atmosphere, which I really appreciated. And those moments are some of my favorite in the game. I won't spoil anything specifically because this game is not that long. It's like a 6 hour long game.
Okay.
So I'm really hesitant to drop too many specifics here because like seeing what all the reveals are and the different areas and places that you go to is a large part of the fun. Um, but there are a few like scenes and montages, I'll call them, that have stuck with me since I finished it, and I think are really well done and memorable in ways that don't just reference Inside or something like that, but kind of stand on their own in their uh, imagery and the kind of ways that they evoke it. I mean, if you don't know anything about Tarsier Studios, they're Swedish, and this game definitely feels kind of like a Swedish kind of the Swedish are known for like their existential kind of stories, and they can be a little bit morbid and things like that. So you definitely get an element of that from this, but in a way that doesn't feel overdone or forced or anything like that.
You're talking my language with the Inside comparison, because that was a big thing that sort of put me off to the Little Nightmares games, was that they were more explicitly, horror, and leaned more into the gore and like the more violent aspects of it. So this is definitely one that has intrigued me since they've announced it, and following the story of them dealing with Embracer and stepping away from the having to step away from the Little Nightmares IP. It's been interesting to see this come out, and it seems like it's been well received. You mentioned the length here. I took I took a look at the Steam reviews, and it definitely seems like the length of this game was a big sticking point. Do you think $40 is a fair price point? You mentioned that you got it on sale. Do you feel like what your sale price was there? Like, what do you make of like the full price of this game?
I think it's pricey for what it is. I think it's hard to say. I mean, for one, it does have co-op, and you get like only one person has to buy the game. So from that angle, if two people are playing it, it's basically a $20 game for each person or something like that. Like the math works out a little bit easier if you are playing this in co-op. But yeah, there's no doubt about like if you're talking about it from a perspective of like dollar per hour or hour per dollar of game, it's pretty light. And that was honestly one of the reasons why I didn't get it right away, is because at $40 it is kind of steep for what it is, and I wasn't really confident how much I was going to enjoy it. But at the $30-ish that I got it for on sale, and now knowing how much I did enjoy it, I feel like I got my money's worth out of it easy. I'm always somebody who's like, I'd rather pay more for a unique experience, regardless of how long it is, than like a super long experience that is not that memorable. So this is, I have no regrets about the money that I spent for this one.
Nice. And I'm assuming you at least dabbled in Little Nightmares 1 and 2. Like, do you think that this lives up to that, or, like, was this a step back? How does it compare to those games? And like, did they win the breakup is my question.
In my book, yes. I'm not
Nice.
a Little Nightmares person. I only played a little bit of them. However, I did watch streams of people co-oping, I think like almost the entirety of 2 and 3. Just because I wasn't going to play 2 and 3, knowing like what I knew about the first one. It was not for me. Yeah, this is much more up my alley. I like the, like I said, the more restrained nature of this. And there's actually they're going to be doing post-launch like expansions for this.
Oh,
I think what they've announced that, the game itself, like I said, is 6 hours, and they're going to have 3 post-launch chapters that come out that follow different characters and like or explore a new story. So I don't know how
That's
long.
awesome.
I don't know how long those chapters will be. I think the expansion pass is like $25 on top of this. So yeah, I'm very curious. I think the first one comes out in August, and then they'll drop periodically through like Q1 of next year, I think. So if those expansions like live up to the base game, and maybe if they I would imagine they do some kind of like complete edition or something afterwards, I think overall that could be an even more compelling package than I think it already is.
That's awesome. Yeah, I didn't know they were doing that, and I would like to see more of these sort of smaller, more narrative focused games do that. We saw Neva, the I forget the name of the developers, but they released the Neva Prologue as well. I still got to get around to playing that, but I'm all for these sort of bite-sized additions to these already smaller narrative experiences. So that's cool. Yeah, Reanimal, everyone. It's out now on PlayStation 5, Nintendo Switch 2, Xbox Series consoles, PC, and through GeForce Now. I imagine that's exclusively through streaming as well. So yeah, just about everywhere you can play it. You can play it now. Matthew, that's going to do it for us tonight. Before we go, I want to remind you guys that you can listen to past episodes and find us on your social network of choice at timekillerspod.com. Once you follow us, DM us your questions, comments, and hot takes. Do you think that gaming is going to be unaffordable forever? Please let us know. I want to know. And if you're listening to us here on this podcast, on whatever podcast service that you're listening to us on, thank you for doing that. We'd love it if you left us a review and gave us 5 stars as well. With that, we're going to sign off. Matthew, anything nice you want to say to the fine folks before we log off?
Keep the lights on.
Keep the lights on, but if it means if you have to choose between keeping the lights on or spending $800 on an Xbox, keep the lights on, and we'll tell you all about the Xbox games that are coming out. We'll see you on the next one.